John Wayne Gacy, otherwise known as the Killer Clown, and the literal reason for my fear of clowns. I'm not even kidding. And if you know true crime at all, which I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you do, you're more than aware of who this guy is. John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. And his case, guys, I do true crime videos over on TikTok, obviously. And that, I think I'm definitely above 200 videos over on TikTok. So I've covered 200 plus cases. John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and BTK are probably the scariest ones that I've researched to date because it's just terrifying to me. It's so scary. And up until I researched this case, I didn't realize that John Wayne Gacy was a well-liked person in his neighborhood. Like, he used to throw parties all the time. He had so many friends. He was a well-respected member of his community. And this whole clown thing that he had going on, it was something that was looked at as such a positive thing because he would dress up as a clown. He would go visit children in children's hospitals. And he really painted himself out to be this amazing person. He was also married twice and he had children, which is always so much more shocking to me when someone that is able to commit these kind of crimes, horrific crimes, when they're a father or a mother. Because what do you mean that you should understand how valuable life is because you brought a life into this world, yet you can so easily in 2 seconds end someone's life and not think twice about it. That's literally the craziest thing in the world to me and a concept that I do not understand. Nevertheless, let's get into today's story. Welcome to episode 13 of I Wish You Were Here. John Wayne Gacy was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. He was one of 3 siblings. He had one younger and one older sister. And his father, also called John Sr., he was a very specific kind of man. And the kind of man, honestly, not even man, just the kind of person that sucked. He was awful. He served in World War I and was now working in auto repairs. And his mom, Marion, on the other hand, she was a stay-at-home mom, so she would be home with the kids. And growing up, John, his mom, and his sisters, they all had a really close relationship. They had a really strong bond. But sadly enough, one of the things that they had in common, the biggest thing that they all had in common, was the fear they had for their father, because John Sr. was a very angry drunk, and he was drunk often. He would either be out late, come home drunk, or just get drunk at home and end up passing out on the couch. But anytime that he would be under the influence, he would get violent, and his immediate reaction was to take his anger out on his family, not only verbally, but also physically. One of John Wayne Gacy's earliest memories was when his father beat him with a leather belt when he was little, which was not an uncommon thing, honestly. I believe he said he has multiple memories of his father taking off his belt and just beating him with it. Sometimes there was a reason for it, sometimes not. Sometimes the reason would be that he was just drunk and he wanted to make John feel so small, constantly telling him that he wasn't a real man, that he would never be, that nobody would like him, nobody would love him, that he wasn't good at this and that. That was all that John Wayne Gacy remembers being yelled at in his ear over and over and over throughout his entire childhood. He spent so much of his childhood looking for validation and love from his father, but all he ever got was thick skin. He only got the complete opposite. In 1949, John was around 7 years old. Him and one of his friends got caught doing inappropriate things to a young girl, which is incredibly messed up. Also insane, because why are you even thinking that way when you're 7 years old? But when his father found out, he was pissed, and he again pulled out his leather belt and he beat him with it as a punishment. That same year, his father introduced him to one of his friends. That friend ended up sexually abusing John on more than one occasion. And John was trained, like his brain was trained to be scared of his dad. There was not one moment in his entire life that he looked at his dad and thought that he was a safe space. He didn't share anything about his dad because his dad would just end up using it against him. So when this happened, that was an extremely traumatizing, horrific experience. It wasn't even a thought for John Wayne Gacy to go to his father and tell him what his friend had done, because there was no chance that he would believe him. If anything, his father would just turn back around and tell him that it was his fault and that he deserved it. So John never told anyone about this abuse because he knew that his father would never believe him, and he would make sure that nobody else believed him either. Growing up, John Wayne Gacy was constantly in and out of hospitals. He would spend days, weeks, months, collectively, probably, if you put all the time together that he was in hospital, it could maybe add up to years because he constantly had to be monitored because of his serious heart condition. And it was also as a result of that he was pretty limited in what he could and couldn't do, fitness, exercise wise. So he wasn't very fit, he wasn't very athletic, and it wasn't necessarily his fault because it did have a lot to do with his heart condition, but it was something that he was bullied heavily for. The worst bullying, though, came from his father, of course. His father would accuse John of faking it. He would tell him that he was just making everything up because he wanted attention, even though there were literal medical records showing that what he was suffering through was a very serious heart condition that he had to be in hospital for. When he was 20 years old, enough was enough. John Wayne Gacy hit his breaking point. He could not stay a day longer in that household because his mental health was declining by the second. He got up and left. He moved to Vegas, and it was in Vegas that he got a very specific kind of job, okay? He got a job working at the morgue. And by that point, also, because the way that he left, it was very dramatic isn't the right word, but it was very much, I'm done, I need to go right this second. So he didn't necessarily prepare himself for his life in Vegas. So when he got there, started working at that morgue, he hadn't found anywhere to live yet. So he started living at the morgue. He would sleep in the back room without anyone knowing, and I guess he would just sneak out in and out of the back room without anyone seeing him. I'm really curious to know if there was like a pillow or a blanket, or was he literally just laying on the floor? Who knows? But on one of his nights there, he was bored, he got curious, and he decided that it would be a good idea to pull out one of the dead bodies at the morgue. So he did. He pulled out the body of a young boy, and John Wayne Gacy crawled up next to him, laid down next to the body, and cuddled him until he started freaking out because what do you mean? It was peaceful to him for a second until he remembered that he was cuddling a deceased body, which I don't even know why he freaked out so much. That was literally his decision. Like, no one forced you to pull that body out. No one forced you to lay next to it. But he absolutely freaked out. He immediately got out of there. He called his mom, asked her if he could come home, and after only 3 months in Vegas, he was out. He was back home in Chicago. When he got back home, he enrolled in college, and he ended up graduating in 1963. By 1964, he had landed a job in sales for a shoe shop in Springfield, Illinois. And it was while he was doing that, during that period of his life, that he met his coworker, Marlon Myers. Immediately fell in love, head over heels. The two of them were married by September of 1964. Shortly after the wedding, him and Marilyn moved to Waterloo, Iowa, because Marilyn's father had purchased 3 KFC restaurants in Waterloo. And his entire plan with these 3 restaurants, I think he may have owed a lot more, but with these 3, he wanted to hand them to his daughter Marilyn and to John Wayne Gacy. John would be the person managing the restaurants. And he loved it, I think. I think that this was really something that he was passionate about. He was learning a lot about business, and it sounds, by the sound of it, that he was good at it. In 1966, the couple gave birth to a son, and in 1967, they had a baby girl. And everything was perfect until it wasn't. Because John Wayne Gacy had a wandering eye, and inside there was a feeling that he couldn't shake. He could tell, he could feel that he was kind of living in a lie, because he had a wife, he had the kids, he had a good job, everything was perfect, but the issue was that deep down he knew who he really was someone that he was hiding, and that person was someone that was attracted to men, young boys. Not women. He knew in his heart that he was bisexual, but he didn't have it in him to tell his wife. So he kind of just accepted that he was going to have to put up this facade of the wife and the kids and figure out a different way to pursue his attraction towards young men. So he opened up what he called the club. It was in the basement of one of the KFC restaurants where he worked, one of the ones that he managed, and he would often invite his employees to come down to the club after work. It became a thing. It was a known thing that John had this club, and coworkers would go down and they would hang out and they would drink and they would stay up late, etc., etc. But John Wayne Gacy didn't extend the invite to go hang out at the club after work to just any employee. He was very selective, very intentional as to who he would ask to come down to the club. And most of those were just young men or young boys, all of whom were his employees. And he would only socialize with the men and with the boys because he wanted to do so. Actually, I don't even think it's valid for me to say men. It was boys, young boys. And of course, his intention of opening up this club, sure, maybe was to drink and hang out, but it was mostly because he wanted a space in which he could hang out with what would end up being his preferred victim type. By August of 1967, John was 25 years old, and this is when we introduce his very first victim, 15-year-old Donald Voorhees. Donald was actually the son of someone that John knew, and he was able to lure him over to his house with the promise of showing him porn. And this young boy was intrigued, and then there was alcohol involved, and they were just chatting, hanging out, and John pulled up some porn. They were watching it, and it eventually turned into John turning over to Donald and saying, "Have you ever done this? Did you know that if you want to do this with a woman, if you want to engage in these kind of acts with a female, you have to do it with a man first, because you have to learn how things work, and it's kind of a requirement that you have to do it with a man before you do it with a woman." And somehow John Wayne Gacy was able to convince him to participate in those gross acts with John himself. He didn't only convince Donald to do that with him, but he convinced a lot of other young men. And he would tell these young men that he had to do these experiments with them and do whatever it was in the bedroom or in the car, honestly, wherever. He would say that he had to engage in sexual acts with them because he was doing it for science. Because John would tell them that he was studying homosexuality and that this was all a part of his scientific experiments. 6 months passed of John doing this to Donald until Donald eventually went to his father and he told him everything. He told him everything that John had done to him, and his father saw red. He was livid. He called the police. John was arrested, but of course he denied everything. That case would end up going to trial. However, John, he has been described as smart, and I guess you could say that he was book smart in some ways, but also some of his decisions, even though he seems to be such a careful, calculated person, some of his decisions are just flat out stupid. Because in the case, when they were waiting to go to trial, John paid another young boy to beat up Donald to avoid him testifying in court. He wanted that boy that he paid to hurt Donald so bad to the point where he wouldn't be able to show up to court. But they found this out, obviously, and it just ended up being yet another thing that John Wayne Gacy got in trouble for. While he was awaiting trial for that case, he was given a psychiatric evaluation, and it was then that he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Then when the case did go to court, he was found guilty, and on December 3rd, he was sentenced to 10 years. That same day, his wife filed for divorce, and she walked out, and John never saw his wife or his children ever again. And this may or may not surprise you, but during his time in prison, John Wayne Gacy was adored. He was the ideal prisoner. He was so popular in there. People loved him. He wasn't only liked by other prisoners, but he was liked by prison staff. And he was just seen as this guy that was lovely and funny and did all these cool things, and people literally started looking up to him. It was the weirdest thing. But while he was in prison, his father passed away, and it was something that hit him really hard for whatever reason. I mean, I'm sure you hear it all the time that it's such a conflicting thing when a parent abuses a child, because the child only wants love, they never get it, and then when that parent passes away, it's kind of like you didn't only lose your parent, you didn't only lose the person who raised you, but you also lost any kind of chance and any kind of hope that you would be able to someday have a good and healthy relationship with them. so it was a hard thing for John Wayne Gacy to come to terms with. But on June 18th of 1970, after only serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence, John Wayne Gacy was let out on parole and he would be on probation for 1 year. Remember that, okay? Within 24 hours of his release, he was back home living in Chicago. At this point, he was 28 years old, and shortly after arriving in Chicago, he ended up getting a job as a chef, but only after 9 months into being in his probation. So while he was still on probation, okay, he got charged again for the sexual abuse of a teenage boy. That boy was claiming that John saw him at a bus stop, that he lured him into his car and tried to sexually abuse him. However, John didn't actually end up getting in trouble for this. It was just dismissed by the court. Reason being, the victim failed to show up to court. And it was only his statement. I mean, it was kind of his word against John's. And now that the victim was MIA, he didn't show up to court. No one was able to get a hold of him. They pretty much didn't have a case anymore, so it was just dropped and forgotten about. On June 22nd, only 4 days, 4 days of John's probation being over, he tried to do the same thing again. This time, he pretended to be a cop. He went up to a boy, he showed a fake badge, and he lured him into his car to sexually abuse him. However, those charges would later end up being dropped as well. And by October 18th of 1971, because the Board of Parole had never heard about those two incidents because the charges were dropped, they thought that John was this new and improved, well-behaved man, because they thought, they were under the impression that he was just laying low, behaving, not doing anything out, because they didn't hear about those two incidents. So on top of that, on top of him not only not getting in trouble for what he did, his criminal convictions in Iowa were sealed, meaning that basically his criminal record was wiped clean. John bought a house with financial assistance from his mother, and it was in that house where he would go on to commit all of his murders. However, again, in this new neighborhood, once he moved in, people loved him. He was lovely to neighbors. He was always willing to help. Every single year, he would throw these massive themed parties. He would invite hundreds of people, including politicians, and the people would look forward to these annual parties. It became a thing, and it became a thing that John was so awesome and so cool and so nice and so great. He was literally loved by so many people in the area in which he lived. In August of 1971, John reconnected with Carol Hoff. She was a girl that he knew from high school, and the two of them started talking again, and they fell in love quite quickly. They ended up getting engaged, they got married, and Carol, along with her 2 daughters, moved into the house with John. That same year, John started his own construction company, and it was successful, okay? He was making good money from this. And again, just another thing to add to the list of things that the community saw as positive things about John Wayne Gacy. He had this successful company, he was a hardworking person, and not only that, he also hired a ton of boys to work for his company, a lot of young boys, but in the eyes of the public, it was kind of seen like, oh, look at this, John is doing such a great thing. He's hiring all these young boys, he's showing them what it means to work hard, he's giving them a sort of mentorship almost, it felt like. But of course, behind closed doors, what John's intentions really were to get close to the boys so he would have the access that he wanted to be able to take advantage of him. And of course, John would throw himself onto his employees. He would like to flirt with them. He would make weird comments. He would like to touch them. And he did, in fact, sexually abuse one of his own employees on a work trip to Florida. Only a couple years into their marriage, John tells his wife that he is bisexual. He comes clean and tells her that sleeping with her actually makes him feel really icky, that it makes him feel really uncomfortable, and that in fact, he doesn't want to do it ever again. In 1975, after they did the deed one night, John told her that was the last time that they would ever do so. He then redirected his attention and started spending majority of his time outside of the house and away from his family. And when he was home, he was still hanging out with young boys. His wife would catch him sneaking in teenage boys into their house in the early hours of the morning. And his garage, to John Wayne Gacy, was sort of his little man cave. No one ever really went in there. His wife didn't go in there. His daughters didn't go in there. It was only him. But that is where he would take these young boys and hang out with him. And that's where his wife would see them walking in and out from. The wife ended up walking into the garage one day because she was curious, and she found evidence that young boys had been inside of their house, and evidence showing that John was very attracted to them and more than likely was doing stuff with them, if you get what I'm saying. So she's, I don't know, probably really conflicted, like pissed, angry, upset. The wife ends up confronting John. John gets extremely defensive and tells her it's none of her business. She ends up filing for divorce in October of 1975. His wife leaves him, she takes her kids with him, and yet again, John finds himself alone. That same year, he decided, now he had the time for a new hobby, so he decided to start looking around, looking for things to do, which is when he found a club called the Jolly Joker Clown Club. And this club was essentially just a group of men that would dress up as clowns. They would work at birthday parties, political functions, charitable events, and children's hospital. And they just performed as clowns. And John thought, this is great. This is for me. This is right up my alley. And he joins the club. He ends up creating for himself two characters. First one, Pogo the Clown. Pogo was a very happy clown. He was joyful, he was exciting, he was cheery. And Patches the Clown was the second character. Patches was a very serious, angry clown. Which also, as I'm saying that out loud, why did he need two different personalities? That's kind of a little bit concerning because you're splitting your personality into these made-up characters. I don't know. Anyway, so he's still keeping up his construction business. It's still doing well, still successful, but now he does this clown thing on the side. In May of 1975, John hires 15-year-old Anthony to work for him at his construction business. And only 2 months into working together, knowing that Anthony had an injured ankle and was vulnerable, John headed over to his house with a present for him. The present was a bottle of booze and handcuffs. And when he showed up, him and Anthony thought it was a chill thing at first. He just thought he was there to chat, ask him how he was doing, whatever. Because at the end of the day, they did know each other. They did talk often. Obviously, Anthony worked for John Wayne Gacy. But they show up, they start drinking this bottle of booze, they start getting really drunk, and all of a sudden, John Wayne Gacy pulls out handcuffs. He handcuffs his employee, Anthony, and he looks at him in the eye and tells him that he had plans to sexually abuse him. However, Anthony was able to free himself from the handcuffs because John put them on incorrectly, and he was able to break free. He pushed John Wayne Gacy down, kind of like, what is wrong with you, man? And John Wayne Gacy all of a sudden feels super remorseful. He keeps saying, I'm sorry, I don't mean to do it again, whatever. Anthony ends up forgiving him because, what else is he gonna do? John ended up leaving his house. But Anthony continued to work for John Wayne Gacy, and he never tried to mess with him again. Now we get to July 26 of 1976. John picks up an 18-year-old hitchhiker named David. He was hitchhiking, so obviously he gets in the car. They start talking about that. David is kind of telling him a little bit about himself in a very casual conversation manner. But he mentions that he was looking for a job. John Wayne Gacy says, oh, what are the odds? I have my own construction company. Just come and work for me. David says, great, that's so nice of you, thank you so much. Later on, David ends up in a very similar situation as Anthony, but this time, John Wayne Gacy decided to dress up as Pogo the Clown, and he looked at David and told him that he had intentions of sexually abusing him. Luckily, David was able to get away. I think John Wayne Gacy also didn't put handcuffs on the right way, so whatever, he just kind of makes a fool of himself, huh? Because I'm pretty sure that after David, he also practically begged on his knees asking for forgiveness, which is why do it and then have to ask for someone to forgive you? Why just not do it at all? And by this point also, David wasn't in the best of places when it came to his life. So obviously, John Wayne Gacy offered him a job, but he also offered for him to be able to live with him because David needed a place to stay. And a month after that incident, John shows up inside of his bedroom. He looks up at him and says, "Dave, you really don't know who I am. Maybe it would be good if you just give me what I want." And he tried to force himself onto David again, and David was strong enough to be able to push him off. And again, John Wayne Gacy, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. This is all a mistake, whatever." Weird guy, because why is this routine for you? December 11th of 1978. John is 36 years old at this time. He goes to a pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois, and he sees a young boy working there. That boy was Robert Peist. And he starts chatting to him. He's asking him how long he's been working there, if he likes his job, blah, 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 blah. And then he asks him how much money he gets paid to be working there. Robert tells him, and John says, that's interesting. I actually own my own construction company, and I pay my employees double the amount that you're getting paid. And after his shift was over, his mom showed up to the pharmacy to pick Robert up, but Robert ran over to her and told her to please wait for him because some contractor just walked in and wanted to talk to him about offering him a job. The mom says, "Okay, cool. Just come back when you're done." So he goes to talk to this contractor, aka John Wayne Gacy, about this job at 9 p.m. Little did anyone know, we don't find this out until later on, by 10 p.m. he was dead. John Wayne Gacy had taken him to his house, put handcuffs on him, sexually assaulted him, then placed a rope around his neck and waited until he died. John Wayne Gacy would later say that moments before his death, Robert was lying on the floor crying, scared, terrified of John Wayne Gacy. He also, for whatever reason, mentions to police later on that while this poor boy was losing his life on his floor, he answered a call and he spoke to his business partner while a boy was dying on his floor. But back to the night of. At the pharmacy, when time had passed and his mom couldn't find him, she went home in a panic and she filed a missing persons report. She was so confused because her son had just talked to her, had just walked up to the window of her car and said, "Be right back, I'm gonna go talk to this guy." And then suddenly, he's nowhere to be found. The police were on this case immediately. The mom was able to tell them that he was last seen at the pharmacy where he worked, and the pharmacy employee was able to tell police the name of this contractor guy that had been there talking to Robert about jobs. John Wayne Gacy. Police look him up, and even though his record had been wiped clean, they still had the access that they needed to see all of his previous accusations and convictions for the things that he had done in the past. And they see written out in black and white that his preferred victim type is exactly what Robert is. Now it's everyone go into action, all hands on deck. Where the F is John Wayne Gacy? They find his address, they show up at his house, he answers the door, and they ask him what he's been up to that night. He says, "Oh yeah, actually I did go to that pharmacy, but I didn't see any boy. I didn't talk to any boy. I didn't talk to anyone. I just popped in for what I needed, paid, and left," which was obviously a lie. So they ask him to come down to the station for questioning, and he says, "You know what? I'm kind of busy right now. Can I just come by later?" And they say, okay, what time do you think you can stop by? And he says, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" Then, when he eventually does show up to the police station, he shows up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. with mud all over him. And officers are like, "Excuse me, what?" First of all, like, why 3 a.m? And also, why are your pants covered in dirt? And John says, "Oh yeah, my bad. I was just in a car accident and I don't really want to talk about the mud on my pants." Okay, weird. Anyway, they go through what John did that night, and he again tells them the same story, but this time around he adds a little white lie. He says that the pharmacy owner called him to let him know that he forgot his notebook there, which is why he then says that he had to return back to the pharmacy to go pick up his notebook, but that was a lie. So for now, they let John go. They let him think that he's in the clear. Meanwhile, what officers start doing behind the scenes is start preparing to get a search warrant for his home, because at this point, they were really suspicious of him. 2 days after Robert's disappearance, cops show up to John's house with a search warrant in hand. The suspicious things they found in that search were several police badges, a pistol, several driver's licenses of different young boys, a class ring with initials engraved, porn magazines, handcuffs, rope, amongst other things. Okay, literally not looking good, like blaring red flags. So they investigate the initials on this class ring further. They contact the school. They find that the boy who the ring belongs to is a missing person. That is now two suspicious missing boys tied directly to John Wayne Gacy. So they keep peeling back the layers of to who this person is. They're trying to figure out what he's been doing, what he's been up to. Who is he? So they take a look at his construction company. They take a look at his roster of employees. And again, the same thing stands out. Every single one of them seems to be a young boy. And they see that one of his employees, a boy named Charles, was recently found dead in the Illinois River earlier that year. And it seemed that his death was never investigated. So now there are two suspicious disappearances and one suspicious death. And they decide that John needs to be on 24-hour surveillance because what is he doing? They need to figure out what he's doing and how all these suspicious circumstances are tied around him. At the same time, authorities talk to David. Remember the hitchhiker that John had picked up on the side of the road? Right, so police talk to David, and David mentions to them that he had been doing work for John. They ask him what kind of work, and he mentions that John had been having him dig up like secret passageways underneath the house. David says that John told him that he needed to do this because they were for drainage and just overall for the maintenance of the house. But now that him and officers are really thinking about it, the fact that this terrifying, suspicious man has secret tunnels that are like a crawl space underneath his house, they were about 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide, I believe. Their suspicion of this guy is through the roof. They're also told that when they were digging these crawl spaces, John wanted a lot of limes in there. And limes, I guess, are used by a lot of contractors, construction workers, and landscapers. But when you mix slime with other things, you can also really make a toxic substance that would give you chemical burns. And it's a substance that a lot of serial killers have used to dissolve human bodies. So John is still under this 24-hour surveillance, and I guess his way to deal with it was to make friends with the officers that were watching him, to make them try to convince them that he really was a good guy. So he's chatting them up, he invites them inside for the drink, they say thanks but no thanks. They would decline his offers to go inside the house for a drink, up until they learned from David that apparently he had this underground suspicious activity underneath his house. So one day, when John invites them in, they had been working on getting a second search warrant, but they didn't have it yet. So they think, okay, this is our chance to go inside the house because we were invited in, and just kind of peep around, like use it as an opportunity to be able to wander around and see if they see anything that stands out. So they're inside, they're talking. One of the officers goes to the bathroom. He flushes the toilet, and when he does, a foul odor fills the room coming from the toilet. And let me tell you something. The smell of human decomposition, the smell of death, it's a smell that you never forget because it's such a distinct foul smell. And I've smelt it before. I don't have time to explain why. Nothing like bad, but I'll tell you guys about that later. However, it's a smell that the officer recognized. It smelled like death. And immediately he knew what it was. Missing boys, secret crawl spaces, and now the smell of death, all connected to the same man. This was now a level 10 urgent crisis, bling, 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 all the red flags, neon red flags shining over John Wayne Gacy. They need to get a second search warrant like yesterday. December 20th, John drives over to his lawyer's house. He shows up. He looks awful. I mean, terrible. He was in such tough shape. So much so that when he requested a drink, an alcoholic beverage, his lawyer handed it to him straight because he looked like he needed it. So John sits in front of his lawyer. He picks up a newspaper, and that newspaper happened to have a picture of Robert with a headline that said missing. John Wayne Gacy points to Robert's picture and says, "This boy is dead. He's dead. He's in a river." The more beverages that he had, the drunker that he was getting, and he ends up spilling his nasty truth, his years of lies and everything that he had been doing, he told his lawyer everything. The sexual abuse, the abductions, the torture, the murders of at least 30 boys. He is hammered on the couch talking to his lawyer, describing the boys that he attacked, describing them as liars, describing himself as the judge, the jury, and the executioner of many, many people. He says that his secret crawl spaces led to a massive underground grave where most of the dead bodies were and had been for years. He tells him that he filled up the grave so much that he literally ran out of space, so he had to dump his last 5 victims in the river. And then, out like a light, he passes out in the middle of his confession, in the middle of this conversation, falls asleep, knocked out. You literally cannot make this up. When he wakes up, his lawyer is, first of all, completely taken aback, confused, scared, all of the things, but he makes sure to stay there until John Wayne Gacy wakes up so that they could talk about this, because what do you mean? So he wakes up and he did not remember a thing. His lawyer told him everything that he confessed to, and John Wayne Gacy goes, well, I can't really think about this right now. I've got things to do. I gotta go. Leaves. John then starts driving around, and it seems like he was saying his final goodbyes to his friends or whatever before he got arrested. And officers did not want to risk this going wrong, so they arrest John Wayne Gacy on something unrelated. They put him in a holding cell, and they get that second search warrant while he was in the holding cell. They go to his house and find out what really was inside of those crawl spaces. What they found were just bones. Endless amount of bones and decomposed children's bodies stacked on top of each other, packed in full. It was unbelievable. Back at the police station, officers tell John that at that same moment, as they're speaking, officers are at his house searching his crawl spaces and told him that I think they had only found, I don't know, a handful at that point. There were so many, but they had only found a handful, and they tell John, it's time to clear the air. We're not even halfway done with the search yet. And with the things that we have already found, you're already facing many, many murder charges. So John tells them that he's ready to clear the air. And on December 22nd of 1978, he gave his official confession of every murder from start to finish. He sat in that chair and told law enforcement that he abducted and killed at least 33 young men and boys, 26 of who were buried in that crawl space from Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana. And he talked about what he would do. His game plan for all of these victims was to lure them inside of his house, handcuff them, claiming that it was a magic trick, sometimes dressed in his clown costume, and then he would sexually assault them and torture them in horrible ways. Then more oftentimes than not, he would pull out a rope for a quote-unquote rope trick, but that would be the thing that he used to murder them. And he would tell his victims, this is the last trick, and then he killed them. He would keep his victims underneath his bed for up to 24 hours before crawling into that crawl space and burying them inside. John Wayne Gacy was found guilty of a lot, but most importantly, he was found guilty of the 33 charges of murder. At that time, his conviction for 33 murders was the most for which any person in the United States history had been convicted. He was given the death penalty and died on May 10th of 1994. I am terrified of this man. But that is all I have on John Wayne Gacy. Let me know what your thoughts are on this case. I want to hear everything. Thoughts, opinions, feedback. And yeah, I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of I Wish You Were Here. As a reminder, you can listen to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Video version is also available on YouTube. Love you.